Welcome everyone to Connected Learning TV and the kickoff session for a month-long series on digital badges, opening new pathways to opportunities. I'm Cheryl Grand, I'm Director of Social Networking at Haystack, and I'll be your host for today. Throughout September, we'll be exploring the connection between digital badges and pathways to new academic and economic opportunities. And I just want to mention, for people who are just learning about badges and what they are, I'm going to give a very brief description. They're image files that have stuff in them. You click them, they open, and inside is information about who earned the badge, who issued the badge, the criteria to earn the badge, and some kind of evidence or artifact that reflects the learning. There's more, but those are the basic pieces, and there's lots of really great information about digital badges that we're going to make available throughout the conversation, but that's the very basic. In upcoming webinars, we'll be rolling those sleeves up and looking at how to build a do-it-yourself badge system, but for today we're going to zip past the technology and system design conversation and get right to the meta concept, so we can discuss the more provocative issues around badges, social equity, and connected learning. Before we dive into our chat with our guests, let's go over a few quick details. If you're participating on live stream right now, we encourage you to use the chat to introduce yourselves, to connect with each other, ask questions. You all know the drill, and we can address all those questions here in Google Plus Hangout. And speaking of Google Plus, I hope you all know that there's a fast-growing connected learning community. There's over 2,400 members, and we would love for you to be part of the badges conversation happening there. The link to the Google Plus community is included in the live stream chat if you're looking for it. And the link for our public group notes Google Doc for today should also be in the live stream chat by now. We're really, we appreciate your energy in capturing highlights and sharing resources related to today's conversation. I hope we have lots of people who are throwing in URLs and helping other people see where these conversations thread to different parts of the internet. And that Google Doc will remain open to the public so we can continue adding to it even after today's conversation. So now the good stuff. We're joined by two wonderful people here in the Hangout, and I wanted to give everyone a chance to briefly introduce themselves. Cathy, how about we start with you?
Hi, I'm Cathy Davidson, and I teach at Duke University. I'm the co-director of something called the PhD Lab here, and I'm also one of the co-founders of Haystack, which is Humanities, Arts, Science, Technology, Alliance, and Collaboratory. We all just say Haystack, and Haystack is the group that administers the digital media and learning competitions, including the Badges for Lifelong Learning competition. So that's all of my titles and interests, and I'm very happy to be here today. Thanks, Cheryl.
And Jim, hello.
Hi, my name is Jim Diamond. I'm a research associate at the Education Development Center. We're a nonprofit research and development organization headquartered in Waltham, Massachusetts. My office is actually in New York City. Most of the work that I do is in the area of K-12 educational technologies, which certainly includes digital badges at this point. And I'm also a digital media and learning grantee recipient, research grant recipient.
Great. Well, I'm going to dive into some questions I have for both of you. Cathy, I'll start with you. Maybe we have people who are joining us today who were at the DML 2013 conference. If you were and you saw the DML badges panel, the Badges for Lifelong Learning panel, you may have seen Cathy give a presentation. If not, definitely take a look at that conversation and that presentation. It really caught the audience's attention. Especially there was one moment where you talked about the average GPA of incoming freshmen to UC Irvine as being 4.1, and I wondered if you could talk about why that's a problem and who suffers and how that connects to badges.
Yeah, I'm happy to, Cheryl, thanks. This year, the median grade point average of a student entering the University of California, Irvine, a tax-supported, publicly funded institution, is 4.1 on a 4.0 scale. That means you're basically perfect, and you've taken advanced placement classes to be better than perfect. There's something so wrong with a society that says to get into your state university, you have to be better than perfect, and better than perfect in the extremely narrow way that we define perfection, which is excellence on primarily on multiple choice tests, end of grade tests, excellence in a very, very narrow range of academic achievement. The funding cutbacks to education that have happened, especially proportional to the number of people wanting to get into higher education in the last 30 years, have meant that fewer and fewer and fewer people proportionately are able to get into college, and it accepts a narrower and narrow range of what counts as achievement. So, for example, in 20 years ago, there were a wide range of vocational forms of advanced education, not necessarily colleges and universities, but all different kinds of vocational education that publicly funded. That pool has shrunk a lot. Also, higher education has not kept up with the digital world that most of our kids live in outside of school. So there are all kinds of qualities that young people well might have that don't even show up in that 4.1 grade point average because it doesn't count. And the adage I like a lot, and I say a lot, is we have to, as a society, figure out ways to count what we value and to value what we count. And right now we have a mismatch between the systems of accreditation that allows kids to have a visible way, a pathway to achieve in our society, and all of the different possible ways of learning. So I personally don't think that we're doing a very good job of preparing kids for this world. There are also kids with enormous potential that feel like they're losers, feel like because I'm not a 4.10 student, I'm not a classically excellent, academically gifted student, I must not have any talents in this world because I don't measure up, I don't count. What I love about badges is they offer us an alternative way of having standardizable, comparable, even machine gradable systems, which are all necessary. We know that. We're not going to be able to replace the current system unless we can come up with, deal with those factors, but that also expands the repertoire of what can count as valued, of what we can count, what we can value. So I'm happy to give examples, but why don't we turn it over to Jim, and maybe Jim, you can add to that, and then we can talk about some specific examples in a little bit.
Yeah, I like you, Cathy. I think what I find most exciting about badges is the opportunity that we have to help kids gain recognition and formalize achievement in some ways in areas that we're just not doing right now. We all recognize as educators that learning is going on outside of classrooms, outside of formal institutions all the time. And in fact, arguably, some of the best learning that's going on is going on outside of classrooms, and we're not recognizing it. So what this really gives us the potential to do is to start to give kids another way to earn credentials, or not even earn credentials, but maybe just have an entrance into a new community, right? To say, here's my badge. You guys speak my language, I speak your language. Let's talk, you know, among other things. So I find that tremendously exciting. And, you know, I think we have a lot of work to do in thinking about, at the institutional level, how we're going to enable those pathways for kids, and how we're going to formalize those pathways for kids.
Great. Cheryl, you began by saying, defining a badge as an image file with stuff in them. What basically we have right now are grades and transcripts that are image files. An A or a B is just an image. It's an image file without stuff in them. Yeah. In other words, we have image files now that are some teachers or some, you know, SAT or ACT score that's just a number. It is not real. It's just a number that evaluates a certain very narrow kind of achievement, but there's no way to click on it and find out what that is, and there's no way to click on it and find out what else might be there. So the complexity and the nuances and the possibilities of badges are one thing I find very, very exciting. And I love, Jim, your idea that it doesn't have to be credentialing in a traditional sense. It can be credentialing in the sense of, hey dude, I'm really good at this, and I'm really good at C++, and you want to learn C++, let's be friends. I can teach you, and maybe you'll teach me a little bit of HCI, human computer interaction, or something else. You know, so it's a communication system, but it has stuff in it. And Cheryl, I actually think that's a very brilliant definition, that it isn't just a representation, there's stuff in it, there's content. You can find out more about the actual human being behind the badge system, which our current systems don't at all. They reduce you to the image. They don't give you the complexity of all the stuff, all the stories, all the things that you can put behind a badge system.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's reminiscent of, you know, the best examples of portfolio-based education.
Yes.
And, you know, so I think in some ways there's not a lot of difference, except that there's transportability in this case that, you know, that I think we've not seen before around portfolios. But, you know, when you think about whatever your favorite examples of portfolio-based systems are, you know, iteration, change over time, kids engaging in critique or defending their work, kids sitting with committees or outside experts and engaging with them in conversations. I think, you know, I think the better badging systems represent a lot of that. And, you know, I think that really is some of the best stuff that we have in education.
Right.
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask. Go ahead, Cathy.
Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to do a little pushing on this idea. And so, Cathy, if you don't mind, I just want to bring people's attention to a book you co-authored with David Theo Goldberg called The Future of Learning Institutions in a Digital Age. And you together wrote that we learn in the 21st century, the way we learn is shifting from issues of authoritativeness to issues of credibility. And I would like for both of you to talk about, we know what happens to non-dominant learners in an authoritative system, but how can a system based on credibility benefit non-dominant learners?
Well, one thing, it defines who is judging. It allows you to define the community that's judging you. So, for example, if I do something great design-wise and put it up on my website, and I have a lot of people approving that, either through a thumbs-up system or even something as simple as a like system on Facebook, there's a whole lot of content about a community that's appreciating what I do. What a badge system does is takes that and comes up with a kind of a credible, more formal definition of who that community is. So that if I say I have 150 likes, it also, there are badge systems that would also allow me to say who is liking, in what situation, what are they liking, when are they liking it, how are they responding. All of that, what we would call metadata, can travel with the badge and actually be represented in the badge system. So there's a lot of stuff, and you can go into that stuff as much as possible. But the idea is, as deeply as you want, but the idea is that it doesn't have to be the educational testing service, a single tester. It can be many other groups that have within their institutions defined what kinds of badges they want to give and how, and award those badges, and then you can use that as part of the referencing system. Jim, I bet you have lots more detail that you can add on that. You're the pro on this one.
Well, God, I mean, what you just said brings up so many questions for me. You know, I agree. There's a kind of scrappiness to badges, which is great, and something that I hope, you know, as a community, however we define this community, that we don't lose that scrappiness, because I think we are in a position to say, right, you know, to sort of shake our fists at formalized, standardized testing systems. So there is something very grassroots and local about badges, or at least that's how it feels to me. And there's a great benefit in that, right? Because I can achieve recognition by the community in which I'm working, and then I can again sort of transport that recognition perhaps to like-minded communities or affiliated communities. The questions that I have, and this might divert us for the moment, so maybe we can come back to it, but how do we ensure that over time that scrappiness isn't co-opted, or does, you know, how do we ensure that over time badging just doesn't become the next transcript system, or the next ETS, right? So what are we going to do going forward, you know, to in fact ensure that this doesn't become too standardized if we start to see a lot of success over time?
Well, that certainly is the issue that I think most of us worry about the most. If all a badge is a grade with stuff in it, we've lost, right? We've spent a lot of time wasting life. Although if let's do the dystopic, if all a badge was a grade with stuff in it, but the stuff included a wider range of appreciation of abilities, that alone would be worth it. That's sort of the minimal requirement of a badge, but that alone is worth it. My favorite example, and I actually wrote about this in one of my books, was a young girl. I visited a 6th grade class several years ago, and there was a young girl who was in trouble because she'd done graffiti on the outside of the school. And this amazing young teacher, instead of punishing her like everybody else wanted to do, said, you're really gifted. And it was a very impoverished public school, 65% free or reduced lunch, we call it in North Carolina, meaning kids were below income level as such they had to be receive free or reduced or subsidized lunches. This art had been taken out of the school. She had no idea she was a gifted artist. She thought of herself as a brat, not as a gifted artist. If art programs still existed, maybe there would have been a teacher who said, you're talented. Right. She was just, the kids loved her because she had purple hair, she was a rebel. She didn't know that all of those things that were against the system actually, within the world we live in now, not only have a place, but an incredible place. And this teacher made her the graphic designer for this whole class. And I was there for one class where she sat there kind of like this and sullen the whole class. It came time to show her graphic designs, and I'm sure you could have measured the energy in the room. All the kids were excited to see what she had done the night before, and this sullen, grumpy rebel girl who reminded me totally of myself in 6th grade suddenly produces these drawings that looked like they were done by professional architects. They were drawings of the project they were doing in class. They were genius. I about 3 months ago had an email from the teacher, actually it's no longer at that school, but another of the teachers told me that this young woman had gone on and was taking MOOCs online and taking human-computer interaction classes, was taking coding classes. Suddenly, she was still the outcast. She still had purple hair. She's still grumpy. She has a great career ahead of her. And in fact, the school had hired her. She's now in 9th grade. Had hired her to do a website for the school. Now, it wasn't part of our badges initiative, but I could so easily see that one individual case becoming a badging case, where something that she didn't even know she had a talent that was useful in the world. She thought she had a talent that was heading right to dropping out of school. Suddenly her school is hiring her to be a web developer. That's the kind of thing that even if badges are just another form of grading, but a more flexible one, we've won. We haven't won all of the battles. We haven't won them forever, but we've won more battles than we're winning right now. Mm-hmm. So that maybe you don't have to be a 4.1 on a 4.0 scale. Maybe you can be 20 different kinds of 4.1 on a 4.0 scale. That doesn't mean you're capturing everybody, but you're capturing a lot of people who are being rejected right now. So even that sort of dystopic version of the badge, I think, has a positive valence to it. I don't know if you agree with that, Jim, but that's...
I completely agree. I completely agree. And again, I think it is, it's part of the great potential of badges. The more that they catch on and the more awareness there is that badges represent something that's meaningful to me, but also potentially something that's quite meaningful to you, I think the more credence they have.
Right.
We have a question coming from our community, if you don't mind me interjecting here. Can you both talk about the concept of badge issuing being a kind of endorsement for the type of person Cathy was just talking about, how this lends credibility? How can a badge lend credibility to those individual accomplishments?
Do you want to start, Jim?
Sure. I mean, this is, so just a small bit of background, because this is a question that's really been on my mind given my research project. So just so people know, the project that I'm working on is a online teacher professional development program that's been developed by a group of social historians at the City University of New York called the American Social History Project. And essentially for years they have been running professional development programs for cities, teachers in New York City. And they are seeking to take those and bring them into an online space and make it a way for teachers to achieve professional development credentials, which is where our badges come in. So what happens is that teachers are achieving badges internally within our system, and then once they've graduated, as it were, they've achieved master history teacher status, they need to be able to go to school administrators or to district administrators and say, you know, I have my badge, and now I would like my continuing education credits, as one example. Or I have my badge, and I really think I'm now qualified to be head of department. Or I have my badge, and I'm now qualified to be the district social studies coordinator. Any number of things, right? What we're investigating is, again, the stuff inside. So one, what needs to be inside that when a teacher goes and shows her badge, what does somebody within her community want to see? That's at one level. At the second level, there is, well, who is this organization that's granting the badge, right? So how do we know who the, you know, I'm in California, for example, American Social History Projects in New York. I'm sure they're terrific people, but I don't know anything about them. So I'm not exactly sure what to make about this badge. Well, again, it goes back to this issue of transparency, right? So when an issuer is transparent about what goes into the badges, so the work that goes into the badges, how the work is being judged, right? So the criteria, and then also the meaningfulness of that work within this particular community of practice. What the issuer is sort of, they're sending out, or you know, they're putting up their own credentials, as it were, as a granting organization. One of the questions that we're asking right now on this project is, what is this back and forth between the badging system and other entities that are interested in badges? What is that dialogue going to look like, and how do we as a community of badgers need to facilitate them? So maybe I'm answering a question with a question, but
I have
you want to add to that?
That's so useful, Jim. I really found that useful. I have two badge examples from last year that are both very elite. I gave the example of my student with the green hair. I think I said purple hair, which was a slip. I had purple hair when I was her age. She had green hair. Two very, very elite examples that tie into what you're talking about. And I think we need an ecosystem that includes the sixth grader with green hair, the teachers getting credentials, and the two examples I'm going to give now. One was I do contract grading with my Duke students, and last year I and a very famous behavioral economist, Dan Ariely, taught a class on the methods of social science and literature. We would do an assignment, but then project teams of students would remix the assignment, and the students actually turned the class inside out, and by the end of the class for their final projects in these project teams had remade the class for the general public. So now it's a self-paced online class that anybody can take. But I had them do badging exercises throughout the class where we would have a grid of all of the qualities that go into creating a final group project. And it could be, the first one I came up with a bunch of qualities, the second experiment they added qualities. But it could be everything from cheerfulness to fabulous web design, WordPress ninja, to great statistician, excellent Bayesian statistician. In other words, it was a very wide range of qualities. And I had the students work within their groups of 4, but separate, and first separately give each other badges, just on literally on a physical piece of paper. It wasn't even online, just to sort of get themselves to think about that, and then come together as a group and look at how their peers had evaluated them. And we did this I had a whole bunch of apprentice teachers, so each group, when they met and saw how they'd been badged by their peers, had somebody there who was trained in this so they could help them. And it was astonishing because it meant that students were finding out from one another how much they contributed and how. In collaborative work, it's often so hard to know what you contribute and how you're valued for that. And then we easily talked about how that system could be automated in this images with stuff in them system to actually become a badge system. We actually didn't make a physical badge system for that class. But what kind of things could be used for that? I then took the grids my students made of the qualities that go into being a good collaborative worker and partner on projects and did a workshop for 80 CEOs of one of the world's largest corporations. I'm not going to say the name of it because I signed a non-disclosure form, so I can't. But there were major CEOs in that room, and I showed them this list, and they were dumbfounded because it turned out no one had ever seen any HR firm that had qualities like stick-to-itiveness, the person who's going to deliver no matter what. Nobody had seen a human resources department say that cheerfulness could make a difference. In other words, things that everybody in the room knew could make or break a project had never been accounted for as far as anyone knew in the systems of evaluation that their corporations had ever developed for evaluating those qualities. So whether it's your teachers who are doing qualities that may not come from education courses but may come from some other kind of world, but that still lead to being a better teacher. Whether it's my girl with, 6th grade girl with green hair whose graffiti can become a job as a web developer from her school instead of a quick road to being a dropout, to being suspended and being a dropout from school. My Duke fancy students at Duke, or these Fortune 100 CEOs realizing qualities that we know make or break our company have no, we don't even acknowledge those. We don't see them. We have no way of branding them. We have no way of carrying them or giving credit for them. That's a large ecosystem of 5 different projects, but in each case, the badges are not just an image with stuff in them. They make visible human qualities that don't, in our current systems, have a way of carrying, of having transparency, of counting in the world. They just get completely discounted and overlooked, even though there's nobody who doesn't know that those are important qualities. We've come up with a system that's a system that's so refined and so selective, it takes out of consideration a whole range of human qualities that we know are incredibly valuable human qualities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would just add, as you're talking, Cathy, one thing I'm reminded of, that it's important, I think, that we as a community but people viewing badges as well realize that there are entire support systems that sit behind these badges, right? Mm-hmm. So it is one thing that's going, I think, to distinguish some badge systems from others. Some badges will be automated, some will require lower levels of work, whatever it might be. Some will require huge amounts of work, but in all cases there has to be some kind of support system that goes along with that badge. And I think that's something we want to make sure that remains front and center, as we're going forward, thinking about badges and thinking about the quality of badges and a quality of a learner's experiences. What kind of support is she getting in this badge? And the reason that question is so important to me is because I want us to be sure that we don't just sort of go down the road of we have a technology that's possibly giving kids more experiences, but we're not necessarily supporting those experiences, right? Right. So I think that's something we just need to be conscious of as we keep going forward.
That's great. And the support can be both traditional kinds of mentors, also can be peers that are seeing the badge and able to reward and give that credibility to their work by a sustained support community for recognizing that work.
Mm-hmm.
Can I interject a question at this point? There's so many things that you've been saying that sort of tie back to this. And it kind of goes to what you were saying, Jim, earlier about the scrappiness. And also, Cathy, when you're talking about these qualities that don't necessarily get acknowledged or recognized that employers and others want to see, badges have a really interesting identity piece to them. And people are also really excited about the potential for badges to connect learning pathways.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, sometimes I ask questions and I know the answer. This one I really don't, and I was looking at it recognizing that there is no answer, but I'm going to see what you both have to say to this. Is there a pedagogical kernel that we can build on to preserve the identity and learning pathways dimensions so that badges don't become yet another way to rank people?
I don't see why badges have, I guess I see badges as almost being antithetical to ranking. I see them much more as a whole conceptual change. It's actually a pre-modern change of excellence and expertise rather than ranking. One reason I always talk about history and the history of standard deviation, the history of grading, the history of IQ tests, the history of multiple choice tests, is the whole idea of ranking is quite a new phenomena in human history. The idea that you'd have 100 people and it was important to know who was 1, who was 2, who was 3, who was 4 is really odd. In older apprenticeship models, you want to know who has attained a level of skill. You don't want to know who attained it first. So I think identity and ranking are only linked together because we have a 1914 to 100, almost 100-year history of putting those things together. But that's 100 years in terms of all human history is very, very tiny. And we know the example of Finland, which has gotten rid of the idea of ranking and has gone from an idea of ranking to an idea of how you achieve excellence, how you and your community define what excellence is, and how you work to make sure everybody achieves that excellence. And you don't care who gets there first. If somebody in a class in Finland achieves what the teachers have said is really what they're trying to achieve in a lesson, they have the privilege of trying to figure out how you communicate that content to the kids who haven't gotten there first, which is a conceptually hugely challenging thing and allows them to improve and be more excellent while everybody else improves. But it doesn't make them first. It just simply makes them the person that's helping other people. And in different exercises with different qualities, different people might get there first. But the ranking is a very recent phenomena. And I think we have to unlearn our idea that identity and excellence are the same as being first. That is sure, foot races go, we've done that kind of thing first, but the idea that intellectually you would be a first or a second or in a 99th percentile is so new. And I think it's often useful to go back to the fact that Sir Francis Galton invented standard deviation to justify to the British Parliament his idea of eugenics. I mean, he was trying to argue to Parliament that that aristocrats should be paid to have children, and working class people in England in the 1860s should be sterilized. Government funds should be used to sterilize the poor because there was an overpopulation of the poor, he felt, and he thought that was a terrible thing. He was an aristocrat. That's really important to realize. That's the origins of our ranking system that has permeated the 20th century, and origins that someone has to be on top because someone has to be on the bottom because you can't be on the top unless someone's at the bottom. That's crazy. I'm either good at tennis or I'm not good at tennis, and I can improve at tennis. It doesn't matter that Cheryl's better at tennis than me. I need to improve at tennis because that's what I want to do right now. In other words, we have to get over the idea. We have to decouple identity and ranking. It's just not. It's an artifact of the 20th century industrial age. I know I'm polemical on that one. So I'm happy to have a counter argument, Jim, if you disagree with that.
No, of course, no. Are you kidding? I just don't know. I mean, there's something utopian about it. I don't know. I don't know how we get rid of the idea of ranking in a capitalist society, to be honest. I mean, I'm not sure we need to go down that road. But I think one way you do it is by having. I think we should treat badges as a kind of charter school experiment, where I think, ideally for me, we would start to see kids earning badges and pursuing their passions and landing jobs as whatever they want to do, or and continuing to develop, so that we have some examples to bring to the table and say, well, look, this is a very different kind of a system, and it turns out that kids and their families and communities can flourish this way. I just don't know how we get, this is something I really struggle with, because it's very easy for me to see badges becoming commodities like everything else. And I think it's such a struggle, and is going to be a struggle, not to go down that road, especially in a sort of hyper-capitalist society like the one we live in which education is, is as big a commodity as anything else, and is not necessarily about developing the individual, but about either maintaining current social ranks and work, class systems, or socializing people in certain ways. I mean, again, that's polemical also. So,
yeah, and I share that polemic. I've got two things. The book I'm writing now ends with a chapter on the myth of the magic hacker. And it's fascinating to me how we have mythologized that tiny percentage of people who dropped out of Harvard in order to become billionaires.
Right.
But there's something about the myth of the dropout who succeeds. You dropped out of high school and now you're selling Tumblr to Yahoo for 1.2 billion, which is certainly capitalist. But it's kind of an odd Lone Ranger version of capitalism. And I think there's some kernel of aspiration in all of our myths. And I don't, as much as I can deconstruct the capitalist part of the myth of the magic hacker, I think there's a yearning in it that can be played upon. I think most people know that grades are crazy, that ranking systems are crazy, that they don't matter. I am part of a scholarship program here at Duke that brings not 4.1 on a 4.0 scale, but 4.10 on a 4.0 scale students to Duke, the best students who are on a total free ride. And at our recruitment dinner, I talked about grading and the artifact of grading. And I said to them, I bet is there anyone in the room, I'm going to say this, let me start over again. I said to them, do you know somebody, raise your hand if you know somebody who is a complete failure at all of the ways of getting into college that has brought you to be in this room, to be considered for the fanciest scholarship Duke offers? Do you know somebody who has completely failed in this world and who you think is smarter than you? And every single person in that room raised a hand, every single one. And I think we all know that. We all know that. And that's something we can build on. I think because ranking is a convention, but human variability and the abilities and the soaring, I'm going to sound lyrical here, the soaring, amazing abilities of humans in ways that defy categorization is something we all know about in our hearts. So capitalism is hard to be defeated, but I think one of the reasons we're all reading Finnish lessons and we're all so excited that this country that got rid of ranking, that's based on equity, not on ranking, that got rid of standardized testing, came in the top 5 when, just for fun, they gave their kids OECD tests, is because we want to believe in that world. We've spent 100 years believing in this other world. I joke and say I don't think I was cut out for the 20th century. I like the 21st a lot better, but I think there's some way that that's true. I feel like I was a round peg in a square hole for the 20th century, and I want us to do better in the 21st. But I think there's a lot of people like that, including these CEOs I meet. I also ask the CEOs, how many of you are like me, dyslexic? And they all raise their hands. And statistically, that's exactly right. You know, I think we have a system that hurts and abuses people so badly, even the people who succeed within it, that we can build on that. There's a human passionate quality we can build on. As long as we resist, and I'm going back to what you said right at the beginning, Jim, as long as we can resist badges becoming simply a more techie version of grades and SAT scores and multiple choice exams and IQ tests.
Yeah.
Big resistance, but I think there's something really human at the heart of the badge.
So, well, I just want to add quickly to that, because I'm sure, Cheryl, you want to get to other stuff, but there is another powerful metaphor, I think, in badging, and is thinking about guilds. And now maybe I'm engaging in my own mythologizing, right? But when we think about the notion of masterpieces and the idea of mastery learning, I think that's something that badges are set up to support, right? So mastery learning, kids moving at their own pace and progressing as they need to, and supported by a community. And that, I think that's such a critical aspect of badging that that we're not always talking enough about. You know, I mean, there's a lot to be said for kids pursuing their own passions, or at learners, period, pursuing their own passions. But there's also a lot to be said for them doing that in a community of support. And again, having a way to talk to others in that community by doing this kind of work. That's a different metaphor in some ways that I feel like than the one we often have now, and it's very powerful. So
it's very powerful, very powerful. I love that. I think that's really important. It's really important. And again, I like using history and I like using cross-cultural examples because we got here to this system of almost America tests more often and at an earlier age than any other society on the planet. We don't do very well at it, but we do it more. We keep trying. But that's a recent thing in human history. And we constructed this pathway to get us to this impasse. We can construct our way out of it. I mean, I think it's really, really important to know that, you know, it's not like Moses came down from the mountain with tablets that had great ABCD grades on them. You know, this is a very recent thing in human history that's designed for Taylorism and Fordism. Get farmers to be factory workers. We can design something for the world we live in now.
You're here.
I know that we have a lot of connected learning researchers and people who are practitioners in these kinds of spaces, and I know from talking to people and from looking at the connected learning research agenda that these environments that are socially embedded and interest-driven, we know that they link learners to academic achievement, to jobs, to civic engagement, kind of tying in with what you were saying, Jim, about this idea of guilds, and Cathy earlier saying historically we did not rank, and this idea of expertise. And I'm wondering, until badges, we haven't really bestowed credentials on those links. I'm wondering what this might mean for the connected learning community in terms of our agenda for research and design. Can badges help us learn something about the transfer of skills to other contexts? Which I just discovered by reading the report, the National Research Council saying that there's very little evidence to show that generalizable cognitive competence does transfer to these other contexts. So it's a question about how can badges help show that there is something, you said earlier, Jim, that the learning is often better in these contexts. Is there something about badges that can help us capture that or learn that?
Well, I hope so, and I mean, I think that there's a real research agenda to be laid out here.
Yes.
In that, as these, you know, Cathy's point earlier about ecosystems, as these ecosystems are developing, I think we have a real opportunity to learn something about the ways in which various stakeholders in these communities are establishing norms and establishing ways of recognizing achievements and work, and in a way that's potentially we don't see in other ways. I mean, I don't think we see it when we look at, you know, college degrees and where people go, but I certainly think we can see it when if we look at learning trajectories, right, which we haven't talked much about, but this idea that a learner might be able to engage in any number of activities within any number of organizations and develop a very diverse skill set, and yet move into some organization that knows exactly what those skills are, or knows that those skills are, the achievement of those skills are a predictor of some future outcome. I think there's a huge research agenda there for us to be looking at. You know, and just one other thing, Cheryl, when you, before you mentioned, well, gosh, I don't remember what the context was, but the word interdisciplinary came into my mind, that I think there's something for us all to really be thinking about when, from an interdisciplinary perspective, how are we as badge issuers helping kids make connections across disciplines and domains and then apply them in other areas. And again, I think this is a real opportunity to do it because where this system is getting created right now as we're going, we're talking about how these things translate. So that's a long way of saying yes, I do think that there's a great potential to do it.
Yeah, and I agree completely, Jim, that we need research to do this and to show this. I do think, Cheryl, one reason the research shows that the cognitive, I'm not sure exactly the phrase used, but cognitive skills don't necessarily, or cognitive achievements don't necessarily transfer is because of the very narrow way we measure cognitive achievements.
Right.
We're also not so great at teaching people how to learn. And it's the most important skill there is. And sometimes people kind of fumble through learning but don't really know what they've done to achieve something. Mm-hmm. And it's often, and this is why I think your idea, Jim, of how important a support community is, it's so important to have somebody outside of you that helps you to see what you've done and how. Somebody once said to me, a very wise person once said to me, if someone ever pays you a compliment, and they mean it, listen, because it doesn't happen all that often. The world doesn't just sort of spontaneously offer you valuable, positive feedback about your life. And when you think about it, it doesn't happen. There's the kind of, oh, I like your dress, I like your shoes, ritual that goes on. But I mean, like somebody really saying, wow, you did great at that meeting. You really have an ability to listen to people. Many of us go through our whole lives without knowing that, and it's partly because of the narrowness of what counts as valuable in our society. It's it's not you don't get a degree in being able to listen well, but yet again, for success in life, that's a hugely important quality. And I would like to change not only the way we grade and the way we count, but how we measure what cognitive surplus or cognitive transference is. I have a feeling there's more cognitive transfer than some research agendas say because in my field, in the field I most know about attention, we have a very unilinear way of measuring what attention is. So it's very easy to measure one kind of distraction from a very single point to another single point. Same with cognitive transference. Often we measure one content area to see how someone does in another content area. Maybe there's something much more meta that you're learning, which is how you learn, how you carry skills. But we just don't even know how to measure that because we've so much been measuring outcomes rather than inputs, and results rather than processes, and ranking rather than excellence. All of those are standardizable, numerical. They all go back to Galton, the basic bell curve of our lives that make things discrete instead of making them learning processes that never stop at any point in our lives. But that we often don't have a way of measuring at all, except when you talk to people in common sense ways, right? You step out of school and you see these common sense ways of judging people all the time. And there have many tests where you ask students to judge to rank all the kids in the class, and then to rank all the kids in the class the way they know their teachers do, and the students do it great. And they, even when they come up with a different ranking and say, here's the smartest to the dumbest kid in my class, here's what the teachers think is the smartest difference between the smartest and the dumbest kids in the class. Kids are pretty smart about what the teachers think is smartest to dumb. There's no reason to believe they're not equally smart about what's actually, or what from a kid's perspective is real intelligence. If they can psych us out, they kind of know what they're talking about. They've proven themselves.
I think that ties back to your earlier comment when I asked you about the 4.1 GPA. One of the things that struck me, like a lot of people in the audience, I was very aware of the non-dominant learner and their place in the system. But what you made me realize is how punitive the whole system is, including what you were saying, Jim, about this interdisciplinary way of thinking, which is the only way that we really know how to solve some of these big, intractable problems. And I'm guessing, maybe you can both comment on this. I know it's been so big in the news, and Haystack has been involved in Mozilla, UCHRI. digital badges caught the attention of Bill Clinton at the Clinton Global Initiative, as well as Chicago Summer of Learning. So this is grassroots, but it's also, it has this feeling of disruptive innovation, not just the technology, but the timing of this to make a difference in the existing systems. Can you talk about what you think the factors are that are sparking this interest at all these different levels with all these different kinds of organizations and people?
I mean, if you want me to go first, first it's historical. There is a mismatch between the systems we've developed that were basically developed between 1865 and 1925, and that we've refined over and over and over again to get to 2013, and the world that happened on April 22nd, 1993, when the Mosaic 1.0 browser goes public and the World Wide Web, it suddenly allows me, who has an idea, to publish that idea to anybody else who has an internet connection. So suddenly I've got this overabundance of information interaction in everywhere else except in the school world, where I'm still learning things, or in a number of official capacities, where I'm still learning things as if there's a set way of learning, top-down, hierarchical. So I think one reason there's such a confluence of people that are saying we've got to come up with another system is we have a mismatch. We have a historically epical mismatch between the systems we've inherited and the world we live in now. Bill Clinton was particularly interested in vets. Here these vets come home, they often have no college degrees at all, and sometimes not even a high school degree, sometimes a GED degree. They look utterly unemployable, and yet they've learned this astonishing wealth of skills that if you could put them together in some other form are skills that are incredibly valuable to the world we live in now. But there's no, we don't have a system for even gathering those things and making sense of what they've learned. So for him, I think he was thinking this is an alternative system that helps us to recognize people who have been, as you say, punished or really rather cruelly rejected from a system that is defines itself not only narrow but anachronistically, right? It's not only a narrow elitist system, it doesn't work, right? You have to, CEOs tell me it now takes 2 years to take the students they are able to hire fresh out of college, who are the most brilliant students ever. Used to take 6 months to teach them how to be adults who recognize what they didn't know and figured out how to find it. Now it takes 2 years because we have trained them in 12 years of school to be terrified of risk-taking and to know that if they get one of those little dots wrong, they might not get into UC Irvine, their public school, a fine public school, but so competitive that one mistake means you're excluded. So it takes a long time to convince people there's no teacher there, there's no SAT place that's going to give them an external grade, that they have to find that ability to be introspective and know what they don't know, which is a quality of adulthood, and figure out how to find that. It takes longer now because we're training them to a system that just isn't working anymore. I don't think we're a minority. I think if you ask people candidly, they agree with that we're in a system of mismatch and exclusion and unfairness and even pain and hurt.
Yeah, I would add that, I think there's something very pragmatic about it, certainly from the CGI, from the Clinton Global Initiative. I mean, I think, as Cathy's saying, there's an awful lot of people who realize that there's an awful lot of skills and interests and passions and work out there that we simply don't have a way of recognizing systematically right now. We just, we don't have a system for seeing these things. It's also, it's hard for me not to think that at a time when there's such a gross disparity in wealth concentrations, in this country and elsewhere, that we would start to see an increased interest in expanding the ways in which we can recognize people, right? I mean, we've had a period of long, very high rates of unemployment here that, don't seem to show any signs of going away very quickly. So it doesn't surprise me that we're starting to have conversations about finding other ways to bring people back in, and I think it's very important, as long as we don't lose the thread, and again, that we just don't go down the road of this becoming yet another standardized credentialing system.
That's great. I thank you both. That was a fantastic answer. We have about a minute left for any final thoughts. Is there anything that we didn't cover in the conversation, or things that you'd like to point people's direct attention toward? Anything you'd like to say about badges we might not have covered?
In a minute, I would say the final point is just we're at the beginning. This is a beta system, and I hope it's always a beta system. But that if it isn't about social justice, why bother? And that we have to make that our primary commitment in everything we do. We have to be teaching offering new pathways to people who've been told that there's a roadblock. And if that's not what badges are doing, then we've wasted a lot of time. That would be my final thing.
Yeah, boy, amen. I can't add to that. I mean, I think if we can keep equity and social justice at the core, then then we're doing something terrific. The only thing, I mean, Cathy, this was wonderful. Really, thank you so much. You're great to talk with and to listen to. This has been fantastic.
I want to thank you too, Jim and Cheryl. Those are great questions. And Jim, you're a rock star in this field. I learned so much from you. So thank you so much.
He is a rock star. Well, thank you both for a great conversation. I enjoyed it too. Cathy, when you were saying we don't praise each other enough, everybody for listening, you're great. Your conversation was really fascinating. By tomorrow, we should have a full recording of this webinar and other curated content that came up, and we'll have that on Connected Learning TV that you can share with your networks. This wraps our first webinar of this month-long series on digital badges, but that doesn't mean our conversations have to end here. In fact, I hope on Thursday from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time, we'll be hosting a Twitter chat using the hashtag DMLBadges to talk about badges in higher education. We encourage everyone to keep this energy going by using the Twitter hashtag DMLBadges and Connected Learning as well, hashtag Connected Learning throughout the month, and by getting involved in the Connected Learning Google Plus community. Of course, Haystack and Mozilla also have very active badge communities, so come and check us out as well. And next Tuesday, we'll have another webinar and chat on how badges connect informal and formal learning and how they can make lifelong learning pathways more visible. So check out Connected Learning TV for more information, and thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Take care.